Hey everyone, welcome. Baron here. This is the update video for my Settlers of Kalgur League starter, the Bleed Earthquake Juggernaut. I'm going to start with a quick gameplay compilation, but you can use the bookmarks below to skip past that if you want to get right down to the details. Here we go.
What's this? A real challenge? You've finally caught my attention. A fellow exile. One more fool under Zana's sway. Allow me to destroy you before she has a chance to betray you too. At least, my way will be quick. You slew my friends. You brought ruin to my world. You have invaded my very center. I should be furious, and yet I feel nothing. How boring and small. Destroying you is as easy as flicking a pest. Did you really think this would work? I transcended all this long ago. Feel the thrill of
the void. Why run? What's the point? Your lives are meaningless. Watch guilty crumble.
Okay, so, bottom line up front. How did my league start go? It went okay. Pretty good. Neither great nor terrible. I'll start by talking in a little bit more detail about the league start process itself, then talk about the current state of the build, first defense, then offense. I'll then call attention to some things that I changed or did differently than planned in my previous video, and then close out by talking about overall thoughts and future directions. If you want to follow along in Path of Building with me here, I've included both the original planned PoB file and my current actual build in the description of this video. So, as for the league start, the whole thing was a little wonky because I spent the first week of the league on a family vacation, so I was really only able to play occasionally and on my Steam Deck whenever my son was taking a nap. So that first Saturday, when I would normally be crushing out like 12 hours of play, get myself firmly into maps, I was instead driving all day. Goblin mode this was not, or at least not Path of Exile Goblin mode. I may have still smelled like it by the end of that drive, but anyways, even though we're 2 weeks into the league now, basically that means my progress is closer to what it would normally be at like 7 to 10 days. We will be talking about exactly what that progress is in a moment, but I want to describe how leveling and gearing have felt and what barriers I've run into. So overall, the leveling went well, and once again, I do give a big shout out to Wooly's Melee Juggernaut leveling guide. I'm going to include another link to that as well, just so you have it. As advertised in my initial video, I made the swap from Sunder to Earthquake during the campaign rather than waiting for the end. That went fairly smoothly, but one difference was I did delay the swap from Sunder to Earthquake until Act 4 or 5, I think, when I got the less duration support gem. That was actually pretty crucial for making the skill feel good. I talked a lot in my initial video about the concept of clunkiness, and that would have been pretty clunky to do without that. Now, the other thing was I actually found a tabula rasa during the leveling process, during the campaign, and that was pretty huge. The campaign was a downright breeze after that, but I almost wished that I hadn't found it so that I could report back to you on how a normal leveling process with a 4-link would have felt. Still, I'm not about to look a gift horse in the mouth or complain about a little good luck, so I used it, and I was happy that I got it. But as usually seems to happen on League Start, campaign felt fine, white maps felt fine, and then there's that awkward period during yellows and early red maps where I wasn't quite killing as fast or surviving quite as well as I would have liked. It seems to happen every league, but even knowing that, I felt a little let down by the Juggernaut's vaunted defenses. I felt like, I did what I was supposed to do. I did my due diligence investing into armor. I got it on a shoestring budget quickly, north of 50,000. I got my elemental resistance cap raised, and more besides, but I was still dying more than expected. But, spoiler alert, in the end, I believe the biggest factor behind that was that I was shortchanging how important life recovery is to a Juggernaut, and I'm going to have some recommendations about that later in the video. So once I cleaned up my life recovery, things felt a lot better, and that's when I felt like my progress really took off. But what is that progress? So at the moment, I've probably got 20 to 25 divines spent into the build. Obviously, that can vary, depending on when you buy things. So something that I bought for a divine at the beginning of the league might have gone way down in price, might have gone way up in price. So this is really a rough estimate, but I can say maybe about 20 to 25 divines, I think. And that's spread fairly evenly among the weapon, the body armor, different jewels, getting suppression capped. I don't think there was one standout piece of gear that cost more than 5 or 6 divine. I crafted the body armor, which we'll take a look at in a minute, but the rest I think I mostly purchased. But speaking of getting suppression capped, which I just mentioned, let's talk about some specific numbers and details, starting with that. So on the defensive side, on top of being suppression capped, I am also fully ailment immune, I am stun immune, my action and movement speed can't be lowered below baseline. For bleeds, I am currently using a flask for bleeds and corrupted blood. It would be nice to get away from that. There are some options for getting away from that. None are great. You could think about taking a mastery, using an abyss jewel, things like that to get bleed immune, and then obviously you can get a corruption to get corrupted blood immunity. For the moment, the flask is working just fine. Probably if I went to fight Cyrus, I might take a second or even third life flask in with me just to make sure. Or maybe I would take the Rislatha Pantheon to make sure that my life flask is continually getting topped up. Anyways, beyond all that, my effective hit pool with no buffs, no flasks up, no molten shell up, effective hit pool is still around 60,000, which is really good. My elemental resists are all 82% or higher. Let's see, what do we got here? Yeah, 82 and then 83% over here. My armor is at around 72,000 without buffs. Again, no flasks, no molten shell. It's around 115,000 if you get your flasks up. Molten shell is actually not adding any substantive amount to the armor value. It adds a little bit of flat armor, but we're getting so much flat armor elsewhere that the flat armor from molten shell, especially at a low-level gem like we're using, is really kind of a drop in the bucket. Let's show it here. Only 328. However, the other part of the buff, which takes damage for us, that's whenever Molten Shell is up, that is always going to be at full power, since 50,000 is the armor benchmark. 50,000 in order to get the maximum benefit. You can see how it says it takes up to 10%. It takes equal to 10% of your armor up to a maximum of 5,000. So in order to get that full benefit of 5,000, you would need 50,000 armor, and since even without flasks we're well above that, that means that you are always getting the full benefit of that 5,000 damage buffer, which means while it's up, our effective hit pool literally doubles. It spikes to over 120,000 with Molten Shell up, which is, I don't need to tell you, outstanding. Obviously in super high DPS content, if you're really juicing things to the gills, that buff is not going to last forever. You're going to need to get out of danger for a second, but in most content, it'll feel great. Let's see. Now, here's the important bit, right? So between Life Leech and Regen, my recovery is between, this can vary a lot, 1,000 and 2,500 life, or even more, per second, depending on how much physical damage I've mitigated recently. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking in a little while about how the original plan deviated. I am, in fact, getting untiring, which was not part of the initial plan. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but this has been a crucial addition to the build. In any case, chaos resistance over here, moving on, is at 65%. I would love to get that up to 75. It's one of my last kind of big defensive goals for the build, would be getting this up to 75, the other of which would be getting some more life. I would love to crank this life total up from 4,700, get it up to 5,000 at least. I think in order to do that, I would probably need to get more levels to kind of rework my skill tree a little bit, or spend a bunch of money. You can kind of see if we scroll through the POB right here, I'm taking advantage on most slots. The helmet, not as much. That's probably one of my lowest life totals, but I'm taking advantage of the fact that there is a buff to how much life can roll on defensive gear. So 173 on my chest armor. That's way higher than you ever could have gotten before. 121 on gloves. 104 on boots. So like, there's room to improve those things, but it would be a big monetary, I'd spend a lot of currency to do that. So some combination of that and getting more levels, because I'm only at level 94 at the moment, to kind of give me a little more flexibility on the skill tree. That would be, I think, my remaining defensive goals. But on the offensive side, as I mentioned in the original video, this is actually something specifically to this build that can depend a lot on your playstyle, aka how sweaty you want to be about it, to put it crudely. So if you go full PoB warrior, you say that you've got at least a partially charged banner up, like 30 out of 50, you've got most, if not all of your rage, 40 rage, I'm not assuming full, total, utter PoB warrior, but you've got your banner, you've got your rage, some of it anyways, you've got your vulnerability curse up, you're lining up your 3 war cries to hit a big bleed, and then you're supplementing the bleed with Vol Earthquake, which should help to aggravate the bleed, yada yada. If you do all that stuff, you could maybe be looking at 10 million DPS in the current state of the build. More if you somehow magically had max rage and max banner stacks when you first hit the enemy. But to be honest, really, aside from the banner, which I very rarely plant in practice, that kind of PoB warrior stuff is actually fairly representative of my normal actual playstyle. Like, even during mapping, most of my hits are going to be exerted by 2 or even usually 3 war cries. I'm going to be happily cursing tankier enemies. The spell goes off quickly. I've got no problem hitting them with vulnerability. I am manually casting that. You could think about getting that as a ring modifier if you wanted to spend some more money. Yeah, and during mapping, I actually do legitimately normally have max rage all the time, and if I was going to place the banner for a really tough enemy, yeah, it's probably going to be at or near its maximum number of Valor stacks. So, like, I don't think too unreasonable to say that you can get 8 to 10 million DPS if you're doing it right, and that's not too bad on a substantially tanky build with 25 Divine or less invested. But if, just for the sake of argument, just to be conservative here, if you wanted to be way more casual, you skip the banner, you skip vulnerability, you only use the war cries, which grant numerous exerts so that you don't have to hit them that often. You figure you have way less maximum, rage, maybe 20, maybe even 15, because you haven't built it up yet. So just, in other words, you're just overall taking a way more conservative approach to the path of building configuration. Even that version of the build is still comfortably doing 2 or 3 million DPS. Now, I wish it was doing more. 2 or 3 million is fine, but it's not great. But, hey, that's what you get league starting a relatively unknown build. And honestly, it really isn't that bad. I do think a fair compromise between the two extremes there would be to say that if you're doing reasonably good about, using your buffs, you get reasonably lucky with how things line up, I think you can comfortably get 6 or 7 million DPS and not feel like you're inflating your numbers, So, in any case, let's talk about what's changed from the previous video when I was just planning this and predicting how it was going to go. I'm not going to assume that you watched that video. I'll put a link in case you do want to watch it, but in this video, I'm going to give a quick description every time I talk about something that's changed. I'll tell you what it changed from. So, for starters, I said in that original video, a couple times actually, that I might have to go with the Warcry wheel right here. Admonisher in order to get this mastery. Warcries cannot exert travel skills, rather, this mastery. And that would be to prevent Leap Slam from eating up my exerts. So remember, just as a refresher, if you're not familiar, the way Warcries work is that they offer 2 sets of bonuses. One general set that lasts a short period of time. So take a look at like Seismic Cry, which is our big boy. One general set that lasts a short period of time, and you're getting the buff regardless of what you're doing. So in this case, the buff is giving you more armor. However, there is a second part of bonuses that are called exerting attacks, or it's relating to exerting attacks. So the Warcry button on your skill bar is going to show a number on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and that number represents how many attacks are left that it can exert. And when it exerts an attack, it gives it bonuses. So in the case of Seismic Cry, exerting it will give it much more area of effect, which is very good for mapping for us. However, obviously, if you are attacking with a skill that you're not actually intending to deal damage, like Leap Slam, or just using it for mobility, you would be wasting your exerts, and that would force you to Warcry more often to make sure that those exerts are happening on your actual Earthquake. So instead, there's this mastery, and I talked in the original video saying, I might have to take this if it feels clunky. There is no might about it. I will be totally honest with you. This wheel and mastery are entirely non-negotiable in my opinion. They are mandatory, must have. You could almost make a case for speccing out of this once you have access to the unveiled crafting option that gives the Warcries cannot exert travel skills modifier on like a belt. But the quality of life granted by the rest of this wheel, you're getting some damage from Admonisher, so you're probably getting 45% increased damage, which is good, and also the Warcry speed from this wheel is just so comfortable. I don't think I can give it up. So even though it's costing me 4 points here, where I could theoretically get the main effect from a belt, I think I'm going to keep the wheel, this whole wheel, indefinitely. I don't think there's, for me, any going back. You can experiment without it, see how it feels to you. That's my preference. Now, another change relating to Warcries that I made was based on a build I saw on PoE Ninja, which took Rallying Cry, despite being a kind of similar build to this one. And this took me by surprise because Rallying Cry I just kind of think of as a minion skill. But as I looked at it and as I looked how it played with this build, I think I kind of saw the attraction. Even if you ignore the minion aspects, just put those to the side, you're still getting a big chunk of flat added damage to your attacks based on whatever your weapon damage is, and that's actually a big deal. This league and for this build in particular. As a quick refresher, quick reminder, most skills have a number on them called effectiveness of added damage. Let's take a look at ours for Earthquake. Effectiveness of added damage. This is the very first multiplier in the damage calculation. It happens before increased damage, before more damage, before crit, before all of it. This is the thing that happens first. It takes any flat damage you get from your weapon, your rings, jewels, auras, wherever you're getting things that say plus 100 to 200 attack damage, that kind of thing, and it multiplies it by a certain amount depending on the skill. Super fast skills, like Cyclone, for example, actually get multiplied by less than 1. It's a penalty, in fact, to added damage because you're hitting so fast. If you're getting a multiplier on that, nobody would do anything but use Cyclone. But big bonking skills, like Earthquake, get a much higher multiplier. And, very importantly, there was a big buff to the effectiveness of added damage for melee skills this league. That was kind of the centerpiece of the melee buff. That number got just jacked way up for most melee skills. In fact, some of them even got fully doubled their effectiveness of added damage bonus, which is crazy. In particular, ours, Earthquake, went from 150% at max level up to what you can see there at 229%. So not quite doubling, but still a very big jump. So, as a result, things like Rallying Cry even without the minion bonuses, are great because they take advantage of that multiplier. That's why I replaced Enduring Cry with Rallying Cry. That and the fact that, frankly, I didn't need anything Enduring Cry was giving me anymore. The regen was inconsistent, and it was rendered kind of unnecessary by taking the Untiring node. And then the endurance charges, Juggernaut has no problem generating endurance charges. So overall, it made more sense to replace Enduring Cry with Rallying Cry, and also, that is, unlike Enduring Cry, that exerts your attacks. So anything that says, however many, bonuses based on how many exertions are benefiting a certain attack. I kind of phrased that badly. Let's just look at one so you can see what I'm talking about. On Earthquake, this is a change that we're going to talk about. I'm using the overexertion support, and this says supported attacks deal 18% more damage for each Warcry exerting them. And that's just one of the several things that benefit if you're using Rallying Cry, which exerts attacks, versus Enduring Cry, which is the one Warcry which does not exert attacks. So, in any case, there were several good reasons to switch to Rallying Cry, and I did. To mention another change that I made, we actually are taking advantage of one of Rallying Cry's minion modifiers, funny enough. Let's look back at it. So, in particular, what we're getting is the 5% more damage per affected ally. As it turns out, my initial plan to run the Flesh and Stone era was wrong. Wouldn't have worked. That 25% reservation, 25% of your mana reservation aura, that only applies to damage from hits. It would only apply to a minority of the damage we're dealing. But you may be aware of another 25% reservation aura that boosts physical damage and very kindly does not limit the bonus to hits. The bleeds will benefit as well. And of course, I'm talking here about Herald of Purity, which gives us just a modest little 12% more physical damage, but with Rallying Cry, the 4 invulnerable minions that are constantly being generated by Herald of Purity, they aren't just handy little body blockers anymore. Rallying Cry means they also grant us another 20% more damage. So that, adding into the fact that we looked at overexert right there, and that benefits us as well, this was a no-brainer. The third Warcry exerting our attack had to do it. So, also, now to move on to another change, for the moment at least, I have decided to entirely forego 2 of my proposed so-called mandatory uniques, apparently not that mandatory, and I have no immediate plans to swap to them. And those were the Amulet and the Belt. For the Amulet, you may remember I proposed either All's Uprising or Ashes of the Stars as my amulet, and I just couldn't quite justify the expense of an All's Uprising, nor could I justify, regardless of whether I went for All's or Ashes of the Stars, which is cheaper, I also couldn't justify the cost to the build of getting rid of the huge amount of life that you can now get. Look at this, I'm getting 121 life. That is double what you're going to get on All's Uprising, and Ashes of the Stars give you no life at all. So that's hard to give up. It's hard to give up the comfiness of being able to get stats like a bunch of attributes, 34 chaos res, the non-channeling skills cost. Like, there's just so much that you can do with a rare amulet that, it was my plan to go with a unique amulet, and it just didn't pan out that way. This was better, in my opinion. And then basically the same logic is going to apply to the belt. The unique belt, Rislatha's Coil, which I considered entirely mandatory as an endgame upgrade at the time. There is a content creator who I've talked about before, who I really respect and admire, Puget, very defensively minded content creator. He had a very wise point that I liked a lot. He had a similar build that he league started with, a chieftain build instead. But we big bonk slam marauders, we are hitting very slowly. So fishing for that big bleed to benefit from the more maximum damage could feel bad. You're constantly hitting middle of the road hits, or even getting hits that are affected by that less minimum physical attack damage, and you second after second, it's taking us a full second to get an earthquake off, and eventually we'll hit a big bleed, but that could feel tedious, and it will definitely feel inconsistent with Rislatha's Coil. So it seemed to me at the time like an intuitive best-in slot for a bleed build. I think Puget makes a great point and a strong case for passing on this item if you are relying on a slow attack speed, as we are. So instead, actually, I've added some different uniques instead, and we've already talked a little bit about them. These are ones that I had only vaguely dreamed up in the future directions section of the previous video. Forbidden Flesh and Flame. And this goes back to what I was saying about recovery being so important. Now, I took the cheapest option available to me. If you think about it, you don't need to take Untiring directly. That is a very expensive set of jewels to take because, of course, all the berserkers of the world want to take it too. We don't need to pay for that one. We're a juggernaut. We can just allocate Untiring, and then whichever of the other nodes that we were going to take manually, take the old-fashioned way, we can buy a cheaper set of Forbidden Flesh and Flame instead to allocate that node. And that's what we did. That's what I did, rather. I took just the cheapest at the time, happened to be these Unyielding. I paid a grand total of 3 div for the both of them together. 2 div for one and 1 for the other. In my opinion, that's a steal, since effectively what it was giving me wasn't Unyielding. It was giving me Untiring, which is a very expensive set of jewels, like I said. Now, Untiring was not originally a core feature of the build, but I am officially making it one, 100%. Having played with and without it, I don't think I can in good conscience recommend this build without taking it. So I think for now my tentative guidance, if you were to league start this, you don't have any currency, would be to skip Unstoppable as your first lab. I originally suggested that be your first one. I say delete that, skip straight to Unflinching instead for your first lab, take Unyielding with your second lab, take Untiring with the third, and then your Uber lab will still be Unbreakable, which is the way I originally done it. And then eventually, if you want, you can do what I did, get some Forbidden Jewels and kind of rework. So I unallocated Unyielding because I knew that I would be getting it from the jewel, and I used that point to get, Untiring instead. So to make up, in the meantime, before you're able to get the Forbidden Jewels, if you opt to do so, you're going to need to make up for the loss of Unstoppable, which is actually a nice quality of life node. It's nothing special, like I said in the first video, but the quality of life is good. So I think you're going to want to take the Brine King Pantheon for chills and freezes, which means that you can't take Lunaris or Solaris, which is what we would want to be taking depending on the situation. And you're probably, honestly, you're even going to want to take Unwavering Stance over here for stuns. The Brine King has this effect that you can't be stunned more often than once every 2 seconds. I think even that is going to feel really terrible with a slow attack build like this. You're constantly going to have your attacks interrupted by stuns with a slow build like this. So I think Unwavering Stance you want to take even if you take the Brine King. Now, luckily, we're in the neighborhood. You know, we're literally walking right past Unwavering Stance. We don't have to go out of our way at all to take it. It's just one single extra point to grab it. I personally think that it's worthwhile to eventually switch to the Forbidden Jewels, but I don't think it's mandatory. So the quality of life is nice to handle all those action speed slows in the game, but I think it's completely justifiable to put those jewel slots to other uses. You know, get your chaos res, get some damage, something like that, and then just shuffle your ascendancy around to skip Unstoppable. I may experiment with that myself and see how it feels. I don't know, but I think in the long term I'm likely to stick with the jewels. But speaking of unique jewels I added, and I'm pretty proud of this idea, I added an impossible escape, and I hadn't seen anybody doing this, so this is an idea. I think I came up with it. I don't think I saw this anywhere. It is allocating, you can allocate any nodes that are in the radius of Avatar of Fire without them being attached to the tree. So this guy up here. I picked this impossible escape jewel up for a steal 4 divines. In my opinion, this is worth dozens of divines. This is worth, people will pay a zillion divines for some leagues. It's for Supreme Ego. Some leagues it's for whichever one lets you get not Crystal Skin, Prismatic. Oh, yeah, of course, Imbalanced Guard and Unwavering Stance. These can be expensive, especially Imbalanced Guard, because you can take both Prismatic Skin and Soul of Steel, which give you a total of +3 to max elemental resistances. I happen to think that this isn't worth quite as much as that, but if people were to figure this out, especially now during Melee League, take a look at what it's giving me. So I'm getting Nomadic Teachings, which is identical to the reason that this is so expensive. Prismatic Skin, these do the exact same thing. No difference. But it's also giving us So, by the way, this is saving us a ton of travel nodes. I don't even know if I would have done it. 1, 2, 3, 4 travel nodes before you can get to nomadic teachings. It's saving you 2 travel nodes. Like, these are okay, 16% increased damage, but they're not as good as what you could be doing with those points elsewhere. So it lets you save these 2 and still allocate butchery, which is nice, increased damage, attack speed, strength. And then I think the other big boy here that's underrated is Vanquisher, crushing enemies that you hit on full life, and of course we're going to be hitting most enemies while they're on full life, and 40% increased damage. That's worth a point. Crushing, by the way, you can see lowers physical damage reduction by 15%. So that's good for us, obviously. Many enemies, especially many late game enemies, have a lot of physical damage reduction. So overall, to be able to pick up these 3 points, look at this. This, to go out of your way, would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or like, I guess if you, no, you come here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I mean, like, you'd have to go way out of your way. Or no, you could come up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nevertheless, I don't think I was going to do that. If I didn't have this impossible escape jewel, I don't think I was going to spend those points. This is good. It's not that good. So I consider this a really clean take. I am getting tankiness. I am getting damage. I am saving points. Feels good all over. So to finish up with the changes, we're just going to go to kind of some less major, kind of more small to medium-sized changes that they basically serve the original purpose or goals of the build, just in a slightly different way. So, like I said, I am now using overexertion support for my main skill setup, just because I switched to a setup where I'm using 3 war cries. This was a no-brainer. Like, you have to do this. This is a huge bonus. 18 times 3 and then plus 10 on top of that. Easy. I am using a slightly suboptimal large cluster jewel here because I wanted this Devastator node. I did talk about this in the initial plan, and I'm going with it. So the explodey feel that this gives, it's not perfect. They're not quite as consistent as I would have liked, and this would be one reason to go Gladiator over Juggernaut. You get explosions on every single enemy, and they deal 33% more damage than this. So, or no. Twice as much. They deal twice as much damage. This is only dealing 1/10 of the enemy's life as Fizz. Gratuitous Violence deals 20%, so it's full doubling. That would be a good reason to go Gladiator. In the meantime, Devastator is good. It's fine. It definitely does help the clear. Like, you can feel the difference. It's just not amazing. Speaking of cluster jewels, I also swapped out one of my passives. I retained this one, Wound Aggravation. I think that's probably best in slot. But here I took Student of Decay. It's less damage than Wasting Affliction, which I was originally going to shoot for, but the Chaos Resistance just feels so good, and it's hard to shore up anywhere else. So, let's see. Speaking of changed skill points, I also changed a few around to grab this excellent socket right here and take the Green Nightmare Jewel. This gives you more spell suppression per amount of nearby cold resist or all elemental resist. And this socket in particular has a ton of that surrounding it. And we are actually, little trick here, also supplementing that by using tattoos of the, oh god, I'm going to mispronounce this, Arangui Moonwarden. What this is doing is we're adding 6% cold resist to these nodes that are in range of the Green Nightmare. And yeah, that works. This cold resist functions just like cold resist that was natively on your tree, and you are getting spell suppression for that. In fact, it is giving you twice as much spell suppression as if you used a spell suppression tattoo. It is giving you 4% instead of 2%, and the cost of these tattoos is way lower. So this is a great trick. This meant I was getting so much suppression over on this chunk of the tree right here that freed up my chest suffix to do something else other than suppression, and it freed up my amulet anoint to not need suppression. Though you could certainly still take Inveterate, which is this guy over here, Inveterate, with your Amulet Anoint in order to get the benefit of that +3 prevented to spell suppression, as well as, this is going to make your other suffixes more flexible. You don't have to get quite as much suppression on every suffix if you've got this. If you went that route, though, you would need to make up for the lack of charisma, the mono-reservation efficiency. I imagine you would probably do that with a chest and helmet essence craft, both of which can have mono-reservation efficiency. Speaking of spell suppression, though, I said in the initial plan that I was eventually going to move beyond needing a quartz flask to cap my spell suppression. And that is true. I did do that. I am at 100% chance to suppress at all times with or without the flask, but I wound up keeping the flask anyways. Interesting. Oops. Items. Why? The phasing. The phasing is just so damned good on this build. We want to get in and out of the thick of the pack very easily. We don't mind being surrounded by enemies since we can't get stunned, and we get recovery based on how many are hitting us from untiring, and just being able to casually walk straight into the center of a pack. I can't tell you how dramatically that improves the number of enemies you hit. It just feels so much better. Phasing, it also lets you cleanly escape from that center if things go south and you need to get out of there. Much easier to get out of the way. It's going to make delving a lot easier too. You could try to get phasing from another source. I think maybe the go-to would be the phase run skill, but I think that you would find that clunky. I haven't tested it, but I just have a suspicion. I think you'd find it clunky and inconsistent because this build has several skills that we need to spam. And then anytime you hit another skill other than phase run, it ends the effects of phase run. So that's no good. You have to wait for the cooldown then before you can use it again. Also, you would definitely not be getting the benefit from the melee damage. Earthquake simply takes too long to attack. There's just no way that you can get the benefit from phase runs melee damage. So for the foreseeable future, for me, I'm giving up a damaging flask and just having my phasing come from that instead. It's good. If anybody can think of a way around that, I'm all ears, but yeah, for now, I'm getting my phasing from a flask. Moving on. The chest armor, of course, one of the big buffs this league, or at least changes. So they nerfed the amount of armor that you're getting from determination as an aura, the amount of flat armor, but instead they offloaded that to gear. You can, on especially chest in particular, you can get a ton more raw armor. So this is at least 50% more than I showed in my preview video. I think I had like 2,000 armor on my chest in that preview video. I've got almost 3,400 here. You could push this as high as like 4,000 if you wanted to really pay for crafting some expensive gear or purchasing it. And then last, in terms of changes, we already talked about some cold resistance tattoos to give a spell suppression. The other tattoo change that I made was I have 6 tattoo of the Kitava Shaman in order to shore up my chance to bleed, and what this does is it frees up some skill points that I needed to make some of the other changes that I talked about. And I do think that that is about it for the changes from my initial plan. So overall, what's my review of the build? Well, it's supposed to be my job as a content creator to rave about how sick and busted and OP a build I made, but I've really never had it in me to exaggerate like that, so I'm just going to say it plainly. I'm enjoying the build. It's good. I'm clearing the content I want, and I am glad that I league started it, but this build isn't exactly the great melee messiah. If you want to bonk, this build will let you bonk. That much is true. But if you're looking to clear all 4 Voidstones solo on 5 div of gear, if you're looking to one-tap Uber Maven and watch her bleed out on the floor, this is probably not the build to do that with. So while I am having fun with this build, I'm definitely going to keep using it for a while, and I can foresee putting a few more upgrades into it. I don't know how much further I'm going to push it from here. This is probably pretty close to the end of the road for it. I just don't know if I want to spend 90 plus Divine to get a new axe that'll give me maybe 3 million more damage. It's sizable, but do I want to spend 90, 100 div on it? I don't know. I could see myself moving on to a new build soon. This one here is plenty competent to farm a wide variety of content and just use that to save up for something new. Hey, maybe to save up for that meme nonsense idea I put in the original poll, remember? Hear me out. Alberon's Warpath, but not replica. We'll see. I'll think about it. But in the meantime, that is all for the update on the bonkety bleedy Juggernaut. Feel free to check out the POBs in the description or even post your own if you followed this build and you're looking for upgrade advice. But in the meantime, I really appreciate you tuning in, and take it easy, everyone.